In this video, I want to get the Mark 7 moving under its own power. So this is my first video of 2023, and I'd just like to say Happy New Year to each and every one of you. I hope you had a blast over the Christmas period. I know I did, because you might have noticed in the last video, we got the Mark 7 that's sitting behind me started for the first time, which I'm super excited about. And today we're cracking on, and I'm going to try and get one step closer to this car moving under its own power. The reaction to the last video has been amazing. It's been my top performing video for the length of time it's been out. It's had so many likes, it's had so many comments, and it's all been really positive. It means so much to me because I put so much work into not only getting the car started, but also into making that video. And just to touch on the comments quickly, a lot of you have made some really good suggestions as to why the car might be running a little bit rough. And to be fair, since I put that fresh fuel in, it has run a lot better. Like, I've started it quite a few times since that video, and like I said, the car is running a lot better now. I still don't think it's perfect, but I don't think it's as drastic as, you know, a couple of the comments suggested maybe the car's still got low compression or that I maybe did something wrong. But I've had no more trouble codes. The engine sounds a lot better when it's running, and it now starts up first time, every time, without me having to give it any throttle at all. So I definitely think we're getting there. There are a few things. The engine still shakes quite a lot, but some people have said it's a 3-cylinder and that's quite common. I don't know if it should shake this much, but that's one thing I can look into. But I'm not too worried about it, especially, like I said, after reading some of the comments. Some people even suggested that once I get this thing out on the road and just give it a good blast, then that should hopefully help clear a few things out. And I know with modern engines, sometimes the ECUs kind of have to relearn what they need to do, so fingers crossed. So today we're going to make a start and try and get this thing actually running and driving. And as always, there are a few comments like, the engine's got low compression, it's an EcoBoost, so it's going to blow up. But you can't please everyone, never mind. Anyway, in today's video, what we're going to be doing is, unfortunately, I've got to change the clutch. Now, I touched on this when I fitted the engine back in the car, because I know a lot of people would tell me that I should have just fitted a brand new clutch when I reinstalled the gearbox onto the engine, but I was reluctant to do it because I didn't know if the engine was actually going to run, and I didn't want to spend that money without knowing that we had a running engine. But the engine does run, and what I was going to do is just see how much life was actually left in this clutch and try and drive it, but I just cannot bleed the clutch to save my life. I think the slave cylinder is shot at because I've tried someone pumping a pedal inside the car. I've tried a vacuum bleeder on this and nothing is working. It just seems to be pulling air through constantly. So I think the slave cylinder is shot at, so I've got a new clutch kit with a slave cylinder, so we're going to get that fitted in this video. And just quickly, my New Year's resolution is better resolution. I've actually gone ahead and picked up a proper camera. Until now, all the videos have been filmed on my iPhone, but I've gone ahead and got a proper camera with an external microphone to hopefully improve the video and audio quality for all my future videos. So I'm disconnecting and removing the battery, removing the air intake, the battery tray, and also the support bracket underneath so I can get to the top of the gearbox. I'm disconnecting the gearbox earth strap, and I'm also disconnecting the clutch feed line. Then I'm jacking the car up so that I can drain the gearbox oil. With the car in the air, I can also go after the suspension, so I'm removing the track rod ends from the hubs, I'm undoing the hub nuts from the drive shaft, and I'm popping out the lower control arm ball joint so I can pull the drive shaft out of the diff. I'm undoing the lower engine and gearbox mount, or torque mount, and then attaching a lifting eye to the top of the gearbox. Now, who remembers the engine support beam that I used when I swapped the gearbox in my Mark 6? This tool is invaluable. It just rests on the inner wings, and then it has two threaded sections with some chains, one to support the weight of the engine and keep it in place, and the other to attach to the gearbox to lower it down. With the support beam in place, I'm tightening the chains to support the weight of the engine and the gearbox. Then I can undo the gearbox mount and all the bell housing bolts as well. This took a pretty long time because some of them are pretty difficult to get to. And I've also got to remove the starter motor. I even got a clip of me actually removing it, and that's got to be worth a like because there is no space in there. But with all the bolts undone, it was just a case of wiggling the input shaft off of the engine, and then I could lower the gearbox down, which was surprisingly more difficult than I was expecting considering the size of this engine and gearbox and the amount of space I had. There really wasn't a lot of space down by those frame rails, but nevertheless, the gearbox is out. Okay, so there we go, the gearbox is out, and it wasn't actually that difficult. There wasn't an awful lot of space under there though. There was hardly any room to get this thing out. I had to put it down at quite an angle to get the back end of it out past the frame rail, but not to worry, it is out. Like I said, it wasn't too difficult, so now I guess it's time to go ahead and change over the clutch, but it has gotten late, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to leave it there for tonight, but I'll pick this back up first thing in the morning. Okay, so it's a new day and it's time to install the new clutch. I've gone for a Borg & Beck clutch kit, which comes with a new clutch disc, a new pressure plate, and a new slave cylinder, which I think was the cause of the issues I was having when trying to bleed the original. I'm really hoping the slave cylinder is the culprit, and that's what I'm removing first. Just 3 8mm bolts, and the old one is out of there. Next, I'm cleaning up the mating surface with some brake cleaner and a fine abrasive pad, and I'm also removing any surface rust from the input shaft with a wire brush. With everything clean, I'm bolting on the new slave cylinder and torquing down the bolts to 10 Newton meters. And with that out of the way, I'm moving on to the clutch. The pressure plate is bolted down to the flywheel using 6 10mm bolts. I'm undoing these with my impact gun, and then the pressure plate along with the clutch disc comes away nice and easily. I really did just want to try and squeeze a little bit more life out of this clutch, just to check that the car actually runs and drives, but unfortunately it didn't happen like that, and it's a good thing I'm changing this out because the original looks pretty well worn compared to our shiny new one. Now, while it may seem a bit wrong to bolt a shiny new clutch onto an old dirty flywheel, there's no signs of any wear or damage to the flywheel, so I'm giving it a good clean with some brake cleaner. I'm also cleaning the friction surface on the pressure plate because just like a new set of brake discs, it comes with a protective coating on from the factory. Now with everything clean, it's time for a fresh pair of gloves because I don't want to contaminate any of these nice clean parts. I'm lining up the clutch disc and the pressure plate, paying close attention to the markings on the clutch disc to make sure that I've got it the right way round. I'm using a clutch alignment tool to make sure that the pressure plate is centered over the clutch disc, and then installing this back onto the car with the 6 10mm bolts, and then these are torqued down to 29 Newton meters. With all the bolts tight, I can remove the clutch alignment tool, and we're done as far as the clutch install is concerned. All the work is really in just removing the gearbox. Actually changing the clutch itself is really quick and simple. Okay, so that's the new clutch and the new slave cylinder fitted, so it's time to try and get that thing back up into the car. What am I worrying about? I rebuilt this whole engine. I've got this. So I'm applying a very small amount of grease that came with the clutch kit to the input shaft, and then using my jack to position the gearbox under the car. I'm raising the gearbox just enough so that I can get the chains back onto the engine support beam. With the gearbox raised off the ground slightly, I'm attempting my first bench press since probably before anyone knew what COVID was. Meanwhile, Mummy Mod is up top, taking up the slack with the chains. Once we got the gearbox high enough, it was just a little bit of wiggling to seat the input shaft into the engine, and a couple of finger-tight bolts just to hold everything in place while I do up the remaining bell housing bolts and reinstall the starter motor. I'm tightening up the gearbox mount, followed by the lower torque mount, and then with everything torqued to spec, well, almost everything, I can loosen the chains and remove the support beam. But the fun doesn't end there because I still need to reinstall the drive shafts, reassemble the front suspension, refill the gearbox with oil, and reconnect all the linkage cables. So there we go, that's everything back together as far as under the car goes, but now it's time to do the thing that is what I think was stopping me being able to drive this car in the first place, and that's bleed the clutch. I couldn't bleed the clutch, and I think it's because the slave cylinder was shot at, so we've replaced that. We've done the clutch while we were in there anyway, which I did need to do, but it's time to try and bleed the clutch, and fingers crossed I can do it. I've got one of those vacuum bleeders, and if that doesn't work, I'll get someone out to help me and press the pedal, and then if that doesn't work, I have no idea. It did say on the clutch kit that you shouldn't use one of those pressure bleeders on this, so I don't know, but I've heard from other people that that's the only way they've managed to bleed certain clutches before, so we'll see how we go. I'll try the vacuum bleeder first, and fingers crossed. So I set up the vacuum bleeder, and as you can see, air was being pulled through, but there was no fluid coming through, and the level in the reservoir wasn't going down at all. So I was starting to think at this point that the slave cylinder probably wasn't the cause of the issue I was having bleeding the clutch. So I decided to just try and bleed the master cylinder by attaching my vacuum bleeder to the feed line to the slave from the master cylinder. Sure enough, the same thing happened, so it's starting to look like possibly the master cylinder was at fault. Someone at work suggested that I should try and reverse bleed the system by trying to force fluid back up to the reservoir from the feed line. So I used a large syringe filled with brake fluid to try and force the fluid back through the master cylinder, but nothing was coming up through the reservoir, and eventually I squeezed just a little bit too hard. So it seems like there's clearly something blocking the fluid getting from the reservoir down to the slave cylinder, so I can only assume, like I said earlier, that the master cylinder is at fault. Now when I push the clutch pedal to the floor, it returns by itself, but it's not necessarily connected directly to the master cylinder. It could just press the piston inside, but then the fluid inside and the pressure in the system is what actually returns the piston inside the cylinder. The pedal just pushes it down, but there's no physical connection between the two pulling it back. This clutch line was disconnected for so long, it's likely that the whole system is just full of air, and that piston inside the master cylinder has been stuck in the depressed position and hasn't had anything to return it, and over time it's been sitting for so long, it's just seized in place. So it looks like the master cylinder needs to come out. There's two lines to disconnect on the back of the firewall, and then the master cylinder itself is actually part of the clutch pedal assembly, so I need to remove this from inside the car. Okay, so that's the clutch pedal assembly off. Now unfortunately there was no way I could actually show you me taking this out because there was hardly room for me in there. let alone getting a camera in there as well. We can just see where the 3 studs this sits on go, 3 nuts that hold that on. There's a few electrical connectors, one on the side here, and there's a couple on the top there, and then this thing comes out. I did have to disconnect the steering column just to get access to the nuts to actually pull this thing out, but it was just 1 bolt and then that slid off. And now we've got it out, so now I can go after the master cylinder, which sits in here. So I'm not quite sure exactly how I get to it. There's a little pivot pin in there that I need to push through, and then hopefully I can get the master cylinder out. There doesn't look like there's much to this, so I'm guessing maybe if this is shot at completely, then I might just have to get a whole new pedal assembly, but I'm not sure. So let's tear into this and see what we can find out. So I set about trying to extract the master cylinder from the pedal assembly, which was quite tricky. And it turns out the master cylinder is actually directly connected to the pedal. So I don't think it's a case of the piston being seized, but there must be some sort of internal fault with the master cylinder. I did eventually manage to get the cylinder out, but I broke the pivot pin in the process. So to save myself any further headaches, I just went ahead and got a replacement pedal assembly. But rather than just fitting the replacement and hoping for the best, I decided to actually test the two side by side. Once again, I filled a large syringe with brake fluid and connected it to the input of the master cylinder. Now, if it's functioning properly, the fluid should just flow through without any resistance. On the original that came out of the car, this wasn't happening. The fluid just wasn't coming out at all. On the replacement though, as soon as I connected it and let the fluid flow through, it just flowed with absolutely no resistance, so it seems that this master cylinder is working perfectly. Well, that's good enough for me anyway, so I'm bolting in the new clutch pedal assembly and reconnecting the steering column. With that done, I reconnected all the clutch lines to the reservoir and to the gearbox, but then when I tried to bleed the system, I was getting leaks. I was getting a leak where the feed line meets the slave cylinder, and I was also getting leaks where I'd reconnected the feed line from the reservoir to the master cylinder. It turns out that the seals that are meant to be on the pipes themselves often get stuck inside the cylinders when you remove them, so I just had to fish out the seals from my old slave cylinder and my old master cylinder and put these back on the respective pipes. Shout out to Sam Hames for that one. I would have had no idea about that without you, mate, so thank you very much. With the seals sorted and everything reconnected properly this time, I could finally bleed the clutch, and I'm happy to say that it actually worked this time. I was able to bleed it without any issues. The fluid was actually getting drawn out of the reservoir and through the system, and we've ended up with a nice firm pedal. There's just a few things left that I need to reassemble, like the air intake, the battery tray, reinstalling the battery, getting all that connected, and then it's finally time to see if the car still starts, and then see if it actually drives. Come on. Right, okay, so that's everything back together, so it's time to see if the car will start again, see if I can put it in gear, and most importantly, see if it will actually drive. Right, okay, here we go. We're in. Right, let's go for a start. Starts. Right, let's go for a gear. Well, no drama there. Okay, let's see. Probably should have put it in reverse, that might help. I don't know where that is. Where's, yeah, there we go. We're moving. Oh my god. Yes, it moves. There we go. I can't see anything because my wing mirrors are tucked in, but we're moving. It sounds pretty rough. Oh my god, I can't believe we're actually moving. That's awesome. Right, I'm going to turn the camera off. I'm just going to take it for a little drive around, just around here, because no tax, no insurance, but I'm just going to drive it around a little bit around here, and yeah, that's awesome. That really doesn't look good. Why is it smoking like that? Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm not going to run this for too long, but it drives. That's not good though. So there we go, we can now say the car runs and drives, but I can't gloss over the fact that there's an awful lot of white smoke coming out of the exhaust. So that is obviously a concern. Those of you that know what that means will know why that's probably put me in a little bit of a bad mood, even though we've done plenty of work and I've actually got somewhere and got the car driving. But yeah, it's not a good sign. So I'm a little bit bummed out about that. There's not really anything else I'm going to do today. Like, there's a few things I need to think about. There's a few things I can check for, but yeah, for now, I think that's going to do it for this video. Like, I'm sorry it's a bit of a disappointing end to the video, and I know there's going to be a lot of people in the comments that are going to tell me that I should have just not bothered, or, you know, I'm just going to end this video here because it's just, yeah, it's one of them things. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.